Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Kim Hansen, Executive Director at Diabetes Canada. And we're here today to talk to you about how those of you who might be affected by prediabetes or diabetes, or maybe who have family who are, can live best and be healthy. We're going to be offering today's remarks in both Portuguese and English. And I'm so pleased to be joined today by Mayra Perotto, who is a registered dietitian and soon to be diabetes educator. And thank you, Mayra, for being with us. We'll be answering some of your key questions about what diabetes is, factors including ethnicity that can put people at higher risk of type 2 diabetes, and more importantly, what you can do to maybe adjust those risks downward, common signs and symptoms of diabetes, and how you can live well with it. We'll be taking your questions at any time. You can submit them via the Q&A function in Zoom if that's how you're joining us, or in the comments on Facebook. So thanks for being here. We welcome your comments at any time. Mayra, let's get started. Diabetes is a serious disease and affects many Canadians. How many people are affected by diabetes in Canada?
Hello, Kim. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all the participants of the webinar. It's my pleasure to be here again. So regarding your question about the seriousness of diabetes, it is indeed a very serious condition. It affects 11 million Canadians currently, if we consider the people living with diabetes and prediabetes. So of this total, the 11 million, over 4.2 million have diabetes, and over 6 million have prediabetes. So together, these numbers, they represent more than 1 in 4 Canadians at the moment. And every 3 minutes, someone is diagnosed with diabetes in Canada. So at this rate, it's estimated that by 2025, 13.6 million Canadians will have either diabetes or prediabetes, if we don't take, the steps that you just mentioned to try to prevent or slow its onset. So if we look at the general population, so overall, this represents 9.5% of the total population with either type 1, type 2 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, but can also, if we take into account the people with prediabetes and people who are undiagnosed, so people who have diabetes and don't know it, this represents 28% of the population. And so this prevalence varies across Canada, with New Brunswick having the highest rate and Nunavut having the lowest rate of diabetes at 3.9%. So I'm going to repeat the answer, in Português. So, boa tarde a todos, obrigada pela participação e pelo convite de estar aqui de novo com vocês. A pergunta foi sobre a seriedade do diabetes. Então, essa é uma doença realmente muito séria. Hoje, nós temos 11 milhões de canadenses com diabetes. Desse total, mais de 4,2 milhões têm diabetes e mais de 6 milhões têm pré-diabetes. A cada 3 minutos, uma nova pessoa é diagnosticada com diabetes. E nesse ritmo, estima-se que até 2025 nós vamos ter 13,6 milhões de pessoas afetadas com diabetes no Canadá. Atualmente, são mais de uma em cada 4 pessoas são afetadas ou com pré-diabetes ou diabetes. Isso representa 9,5% da população como um todo com diabetes e quase 30% se a gente considerar os casos com pré-diabetes e as pessoas não diagnosticadas ainda com diabetes. E essa prevalência ela varia de acordo com a província. Em New Brunswick é a taxa mais alta e Nunavut é a taxa mais baixa com 3,9%. Back to you, Kim.
Obrigada, Mayra. Now, that's some great facts in overview of diabetes. Now let's find out what our viewers know. So we're going to do a little bit of a poll. Please respond to this question. So which of the following statements is true? Eating too much sugar can cause diabetes. Insulin is a cure for diabetes. Diabetes is a serious disease like cancer or heart disease. And there are 2 types of diabetes. So it's not necessarily true that only one of these is true, but let us know which is true. I'll just give our viewers about 10 or 15 more seconds to respond, and then we'll have a quick look at the results before we get into more of our content today. Okay, there's our poll results. So those of you who guessed that diabetes is a serious disease like cancer or heart disease are absolutely right. That is a true statement. Whereas, sorry, I'll start at the beginning of the slide. Eating too much sugar does not cause diabetes. And it's really important that we know that no one living with diabetes caused it to themselves really at all, but certainly not by eating too much sugar. Insulin, while it's a really important treatment for diabetes, is really helpful, but it's not a cure. We still have diabetes even though we take insulin. So diabetes is a very serious disease. And then the last question, while there are commonly thought of as being two types of diabetes, and those are the two main types, type 1 and type 2, which Myra will talk about in a few minutes, there are actually a few other types. So there are really more, and our science is evolving to help us understand that even those two might be not quite enough. So thanks for participating in the poll. We'll keep going, Myra. Can we please, can you explain to us the changes that happen in our body once someone develops diabetes?
So let's begin with how things are happening in the body when our pancreas and our insulin are working properly. So our body gets energy or the fuel that it needs by breaking down carbohydrates or sugars into glucose, which is the form of sugar that circulates in our blood to provide our body with the energy that it needs. And we get these carbohydrates, which are broken down into glucose from foods like breads, pasta, potatoes, milk, fruits, and vegetables. Now, to use this glucose or this sugar for energy, the body needs insulin. And insulin is produced by the pancreas, and it works like a key to let glucose from the blood enter the parts of the body, such as our muscles or our brain, where it's going to be used for energy. So insulin moves sugar out of the blood and into the different parts of the body where it's going to be used for fuel. So in someone with diabetes, the process of either producing insulin or using insulin is impaired. So, now in português, o que acontece com diabetes? Então, o processo normal de obtenção de energia no corpo é que o nosso corpo precisa de energia ou do seu combustível digerindo ou quebrando os carboidratos em glicose ou açúcar no sangue. E a gente obtém esses carboidratos de comidas como pão, como massa, como batata, leite, frutas e vegetais. Para usar essa energia na forma de glicose pelas diferentes partes do corpo que precisam de energia, como por exemplo os nossos músculos ou até o nosso cérebro, o corpo precisa da insulina, que tem a ação de transportar o açúcar da circulação ou do sangue para as diferentes partes do corpo onde essa energia vai ser utilizada. A pessoa com diabetes tem uma falha na produção de insulina ou na maneira como o corpo está utilizando a insulina.
Great.
Back to you, Kim.
Thanks, Myra. Now, we talked a minute ago about how there are different types of diabetes. Can you tell us about the difference between them, please?
Sure, of course. So in a person who has diabetes, there are different types, as you mentioned. So if the person has type 1 diabetes, it means that their body is not able to produce its own insulin. So that's the diabetes that we call type 1. With type 2 diabetes, the body makes too little or doesn't use the insulin properly. So there's something called insulin resistance. Our body doesn't use it effectively. So your blood sugars go up when you're either unable to produce insulin or the insulin is not working well. So when these blood sugars start to increase, instead of sugar moving into the different parts of the body where it is going to be used for energy, the sugar continues to float around in the blood. And over time, this is what leads to the complications associated with diabetes, such as small vessel damage to the eyes, for example, causing blindness, or the kidneys causing kidney failure, and also damage to large blood vessels, which can cause heart attacks or stroke. So now we're going to go into a little bit more detail. What's type 1, what's type 2, and what are the other types of diabetes that have also been identified. So with type 1, as I mentioned, the body can no longer make its own insulin, and it affects about 10% of people living with diabetes. It's diagnosed most often in children and adults, although it can also occur in adults of older age. Because in type 1, our body is no longer able to make its own insulin, people with type 1 must inject insulin every day, either through needles or injections using an insulin pen or an insulin pump. So currently, we don't have a cure for type 1 diabetes, as you mentioned, Kim, but it can be managed with healthy eating, with exercise, with checking your blood sugars frequently, and taking daily insulin injections. And one thing that I should also mention is that it can't be prevented, so which is something that you highlighted earlier, Kim. So the
sorry to interrupt you, but just maybe before you go on to the other types, I wonder if you wanted to explain type 1 in Portuguese and then
I'm sorry. Yeah, I missed that step. So, agora em português, os diferentes tipos de diabetes. Então, no diabetes do tipo 1, o que acontece é que o corpo não perde a capacidade de produzir a sua própria insulina. Esse tipo de diabetes, ele é comumente encontrado em crianças e adultos jovens, mas pode também ser encontrado em pessoas com mais idade, e elas representam mais ou menos 10%, né, do total de pessoas com diabetes. E nesse caso, como o corpo não tem mais a capacidade de produzir a sua própria insulina, as pessoas com diabetes tipo 1, elas devem tomar injeções diárias de insulina, na forma de agulhas, ou na forma de canetas, ou no caso, o uso de uma bomba, né? Esse tipo de diabetes, ele não pode ser prevenido, né? Então não é o caso da pessoa ter feito alguma coisa para causar, e também não existe uma cura, mas o tratamento ele consiste nas injeções diárias de insulina, o monitoramento dos açúcares, na alimentação saudável e também na atividade física para equilibrar os níveis de açúcar no sangue. Okay. Now, back to the second type of diabetes that we were going to talk about, Kim and participants. We were mentioning the other type of diabetes. There's type 1, type 2, but another type of diabetes is called pre-diabetes. And as the name pretty much explains, pre-diabetes occurs when our blood sugar levels are higher than normal, but not quite high enough to be classified as diabetes. And although there's no cure for diabetes, as we mentioned, but the longer you've had diabetes, the higher your risk of developing complications associated with it. So with pre-diabetes, it provides us the chance to work on the factors that we can modify that increase our risk to develop diabetes. So investing in lifestyle choices such as healthy eating and becoming more physically active. With pre-diabetes, the way to diagnose it is you take a blood test that is requested by your healthcare professional, and often there are no symptoms, but with a structured program designed to improve healthy habits and which include healthy eating and physical activity, you can reduce your risk by up to 60% of developing diabetes. Now in Português, o pré-diabetes acontece quando os níveis de açúcar eles estão ainda um pouco elevados, mas não elevados o suficiente para serem classificados como diabetes. Quando a pessoa tem diabetes, e quanto mais tempo ela tem diabetes, maior o risco dela desenvolver as complicações relacionadas ao diabetes. Então, quando começa o pré-diabetes, essa é a oportunidade que a gente tem de seguir algumas mudanças na alimentação e na atividade física, porque com um programa estruturado, esse risco de desenvolver diabetes ele pode ser reduzido em até 60%. E o diagnóstico de pré-diabetes é feito com um exame de sangue que é pedido pelo seu profissional de saúde. Okay. Now, back to another type of diabetes that we have talked about, it's type 2. So this type of diabetes represents the most common type of diabetes, with about 90% of people who have diabetes having type 2. So diabetes is most common, type 2 diabetes is most commonly seen in adults, but it can also affect younger people, in particular people who have a strong genetic component for the development of diabetes, and that's true for the indigenous population, for example. So if you recall what we were mentioning earlier, type 2 is caused when the body does not make enough insulin or cannot use the insulin that it does make properly. And while there's no cure for type 2, just like type 1, type 2 can be managed with healthy eating and exercise, as well as checking or monitoring your blood sugars and taking medication to keep your blood sugars in the healthy range. Now, em português, o diabetes do tipo 2 é uma outra forma de diabetes que representa o maior número de pessoas que têm diabetes, e esse diabetes afeta cerca de 90% do total de pessoas com diabetes. Ele ocorre quando o corpo ele produz insulina em quantidade insuficiente, ou quando a insulina que o corpo produz não está funcionando de maneira adequada para controlar os níveis de açúcar no sangue. Então, quando a pessoa tem diabetes do tipo 2, ela não existe uma cura, mas ela pode ser manejada com alimentação saudável e com exercícios, assim como o monitoramento dos níveis de açúcar no sangue e o uso de medicação, se for necessário, para manter os níveis de açúcar dentro do normal. Okay? Now, back to English with one more form of diabetes that you may have heard about, which is gestational diabetes. So this kind of diabetes occurs or it develops during pregnancy. So it's first diagnosed during pregnancy. So that's what we call gestational diabetes. And it affects up to 3.7% of all pregnancies, although the prevalence is higher, again, with indigenous populations. So it's very important that all women get tested for gestational diabetes, and the risks associated with this type of diabetes is having a very large baby, which can be dangerous for the mom and the baby during delivery, higher rates of C-section, and also dangerously low blood sugar levels for the baby. Now, with gestational diabetes, the mother's blood sugar levels often return to normal after delivery, but the mother has an increased risk of developing diabetes later in life. So it's this type of diabetes, it can be managed with healthy food choices, but sometimes it also does require insulin to keep blood sugar levels in the healthy range for the mom and the baby. Então, em português, outro tipo de diabetes é o diabetes gestacional, que acontece ou é diagnosticado pela primeira vez durante a gestação. Ele afeta cerca de 3,7% de todas as mulheres grávidas. Ele pode causar complicações tanto para a mãe quanto para o bebê, como, por exemplo, um bebê que tem macrosomia, ou seja, um alto peso ao nascer, o que pode trazer complicações tanto para a mãe quanto para o bebê. Pode exigir mais partos do tipo cesárea e os níveis de açúcar podem ficar perigosamente baixos para o bebê. Esse tipo de diabetes ele pode ser manejado com alimentação saudável, mas às vezes ele requer insulina e frequentemente depois da gestação os níveis de açúcar da mãe voltam ao normal, mas essa mãe ela tem um risco elevado de ter diabetes futuramente. Back to you, Kim.
Thanks, Myra. Now, you've mentioned that, and we know that diabetes can't always be prevented, but, and we know that we can't do it at all in the case of type 1 or even some of the other forms. But what are the things that we know about that are the risk factors, especially for type 2, the most common form of diabetes?
Yes, so for sure, Kim, it's important to know what the risk factors are, and some of them we can modify, and that's where the investment in lifestyle factors is so important, but there are factors that we unfortunately can't modify. So for example, age is one risk factor for having diabetes. So if you're 40 or older, your risk is higher. Being a member of a high-risk group, such as Aboriginal, Hispanic, South Asian, or Asian and African ethnicity increases your risk. Having delivered a baby that weighed over 4 pounds, or having had gestational diabetes, having high blood pressure or high cholesterol is a risk factor. Being overweight, in particular, if the weight is centered around the abdominal, is concentrated in the abdominal area, so the apple-shaped body type. Having low physical activity levels can increase your risk of having diabetes. and also being of lower socioeconomic status, because these conditions can affect your ability to maintain healthy habits such as healthy eating, physical activity, and also accessing information that, that can help to influence your health positively. So taken together, these factors, they can work in combination to determine someone's risk. So what we encourage people to do is to take the test, and this is a validated test that's available online at diabetestest.ca. And this is, the test is like a point system. So the more points you have, the higher your risk, but then you can also it can also help you to identify the steps that you can take to lower that risk. Agora em português, quais são os fatores de risco para o diabetes? É importante a gente saber que tem alguns fatores que a gente pode modificar e outros que não, como por exemplo, ter um familiar com diabetes, mãe ou pai, irmãos, irmão ou irmã, ser membro de um grupo étnico de alto risco, como por exemplo a população aborígene, população hispânica, população do sul asiático, da Ásia e africano. Ter tido um bebê que pesou mais de 9 libras ou 5 quilos ao nascer, ou ter diabetes gestacional durante a gestação, ter pressão alta ou ter colesterol alto, ter excesso de peso, em particular se esse excesso de peso está concentrado na região central, aquele formato de maçã do corpo, e também ter um nível socioeconômico mais baixo, porque isso pode afetar a sua capacidade de ter uma alimentação saudável, fazer atividade física e também obter informações que ajudam no controle da saúde. Então, a melhor forma de saber como que esses riscos, se esses riscos estão afetando você, é fazer esse teste que se chama CAN-RISC, e ele é um teste validado, que também ajuda você a identificar quais são os fatores que você pode fazer para modificar esse risco. So back to you, Kim. One factor that I forgot to mention is having a family member with diabetes. So a mother, your father, or a brother or sister with diabetes increases your risk. And that's one of the non-modifiable factors that can increase your risk for diabetes.
Thanks so much, Myra. Now I see we've got one question from a viewer that I wonder if maybe you can fold into your answer to my next question. Mm-hmm. So my next question for you was going to be, how does somebody know if they have diabetes? And the question from our viewer is, what's a healthy range of blood sugar? So maybe as you're answering that, you can share with our viewers what a kind of a normal blood sugar level is, and maybe what the difference is between pre-diabetes and perhaps diabetes.
Sure, Kim. So we're going to go to the next slide. So I'm going to begin by talking about the signs and symptoms for diabetes. So the classic signs and symptoms are feeling very thirsty and needing to urinate often. And these symptoms occur because the body is trying to pee out some of that extra sugar. So you do need to pee more often, but you also become more thirsty. Rapid changes in weight, again, because we're not obtaining the energy that we need from carbohydrates. So the body has to break down the muscles and fat tissue to provide that extra energy. Feeling very tired, having blurry vision because the sugar levels can affect the tissue of the eyes. Numerous infections, so frequent infections that are slow to heal. And also cuts and bruises, tingling or loss of feeling in the hands or feet, and trouble getting or keeping an erection. So these are the most common symptoms. However, they do develop or tend to develop quickly with type 1 diabetes. However, with type 2, they develop slowly, and in some people, they may even go unnoticed. So it's important to know your risk factors and also to get tested. Now, for the question from the viewer about what is a normal blood sugar result. So there are different tests or blood tests that can determine whether your blood sugar levels are in the normal range, pre-diabetes, at risk, or type 2 diabetes. So for type 2, the blood sugar levels that will be diagnosed as diabetes is having a fasting blood sugar level higher than 7, or an A1C level, which is an average of your blood sugars for the 3 months before the blood test, higher than, equal to or higher than 6.5. Now, if this is your case, these two tests, they need to get repeated. And there's also a third test, which is done where people drink a very high glucose syrup. So it's called the oral glucose tolerance test. So in that case, if you do have that test, your blood sugar levels and your blood sugar levels are 11.1 or higher 1 hour after you drink this fluid, then that's also classified as diabetes. Okay, so I hope that addressed the question of the participant.
I think it did, Myra. Thanks. Maybe again in Portuguese?
Sure. So a pergunta do participante foi quais são os sintomas que podem indicar, sinais e sintomas que podem indicar diabetes, e também quais são os níveis de açúcar que são classificados como diabetes. Então, os sintomas mais clássicos, eles são a sede e o aumento da frequência de urinar, porque o corpo está tentando eliminar um pouco do excesso de açúcar pela urina, e por isso a gente acaba urinando mais, mas também tendo mais sede. A gente perde muito peso rapidamente, porque o corpo está tentando utilizar a energia que vem dos músculos e também da gordura, porque o açúcar não está disponível como uma fonte de energia. A pessoa se sente cansada, ela tem a visão turva, porque o açúcar afeta o tecido dos olhos. A pessoa pode ter várias infecções, pode ter cortes e machucados que demoram para cicatrizar. E a pessoa tem uma sensação de formigamento ou de agulhas nas mãos ou nos pés. E também a pessoa tem dificuldade de manter ou atingir uma ereção. E sobre os níveis de açúcar, então, são 3 testes, 2 deles são os mais comuns, que é o açúcar de jejum. Então, se a pessoa tem um açúcar de jejum maior do que 7, esse nível é classificado como diabetes. Ou então a hemoglobina glicada, que é um teste que representa os níveis de açúcar nos 3 meses anteriores ao exame. Se tiver um nível de hemoglobina glicada de 6,5% ou mais. E também o teste de carga oral de glicose, quando a pessoa ingere uma bebida rica em açúcar, e se os níveis de açúcar 1 hora depois desse teste tiverem 11,1, ou maior, são situações caracterizadas como diabetes. Agora, para os 3 testes, eles precisam ser repetidos para confirmar esse diagnóstico. Back to you, Kim.
Great, Myra. So those are great signs for folks to watch for in themselves or others and to check into when they start to see. Now, if someone is diagnosed with diabetes, what are the complications that they may be at slightly greater risk of?
Sure, Kim. So diabetes is a serious disease and it can be life-threatening the longer these blood sugar levels are uncontrolled. So diabetes, for example, can affect people, can impact the risk, for example, of having a stroke. So people with diabetes and high blood pressure, they have a risk of stroke that's twice the risk of people who have just high blood pressure alone. They also have higher rates of adult blindness. Heart disease is 2 to 4 times more common in people with diabetes. And diabetes is also the most common cause of kidney failure and amputation. That's not the result of an accident. But the good news is that these complications, they can be prevented or delayed. And we have very solid evidence coming from scientific studies showing that when you have well-controlled blood sugar levels, that you can prevent or delay all these complications. Agora, em português, quais são os impactos que o diabetes pode ter na saúde de uma pessoa? Então, o diabetes é uma doença séria que pode levar, por exemplo, ao maior risco de ter um AVC ou derrame, um risco de 2 vezes mais do que uma pessoa que apenas tem pressão alta e diabetes. E também o diabetes ele pode levar à cegueira. A pessoa com diabetes tem um risco de ter doença cardiovascular que é 2 a 4 vezes mais alta do que pessoas sem diabetes. E também a pessoa com diabetes pode ter insuficiência renal e amputação que não é causada por um acidente. Então, diante de todas essas complicações, a boa notícia é que, com base em estudos científicos com milhares de pessoas com diabetes, essas complicações elas podem ser reduzidas ou mesmo adiadas quando nós temos um bom controle dos níveis de açúcar no sangue. Back to you, Kim.
Thanks, Myra. So we know that there are things that folks can do to prevent or delay the onset of type 2 diabetes and to help manage their diabetes if they're already living with it. Tell us about what some of those measures are.
Absolutely, Kim. So we can start by talking about healthy food choices. And Canada's Food Guide is a great template for that, because Canada's Food Guide is a guide, it's designed to help people make healthy food choices most of the time. And this guide is available in Portuguese as well as 16 other languages. So whether a person has diabetes or not, or is trying to prevent diabetes, Canada's Food Guide is a great resource. So what Canada's Food Guide does for us is it shows us the layout of a balanced plate. So that's very important. And it also tells us what kinds of foods should be part of most of the meals that we're having and the snacks that we're having. So a healthy or a balanced plate contains a variety of foods from each of the food groups, such as fruits, vegetables, protein foods, and whole grain foods. So often people with diabetes think that they must eliminate carbohydrates because that will raise their blood sugar levels. But everybody, whether you have diabetes or not, we need energy from carbohydrates. But if you have a moderate portion of these foods, then that's a healthy balance in relation to vegetables, which should be filling half of your plate for lunch and dinner, and protein foods, where the food guide encourages a combination of more protein coming from plant sources. And these plant sources are very common in the Portuguese and Brazilian diet. So foods such as beans and chickpeas, for example. So we should really be looking at some of the traditional foods to when we are going to assemble our plate most of the time. The food guide also tells us that, limiting the types of fats that can increase your risk of heart disease. So saturated fats coming from foods such as processed meats, and also from, high fat cuts of meat, and foods like sausages, for example, and choosing more of fats from olive oil, from canola oil, and using any oil or any fat in moderate amounts, as well as sugar and salt. So choosing the foods that, when you look at the plate, you see a lot of, minimally processed or unprocessed foods. So trying to choose more foods that we prepare ourselves, because when we do that, we are able to control how much salt, how much fat, and how much sugar is going into these foods. Whereas if we choose the highly processed foods, these ingredients have been added, at the industrial level. So we don't have that much control. And if you are going to choose those foods, it doesn't mean that you should never have them, but just have them in, moderate amounts and less frequently. And finally, make water your drink of choice, because with liquid calories coming from things like juice and pop, our body just doesn't register those calories as well. So not only do they raise your blood sugar levels, irrespective of the sugar being natural or not natural, but the fact is that if we drink, a big glass of Coke or juice, our body just doesn't really know that we're taking in all these extra calories in the form of fluid. And finally, use food labels, but be aware that food marketing can influence your food choices. So just like any other form of marketing that's out there, food marketing is not always designed to help you make the most informed choice. So the way to know that is you read the claims, such as, low fat, but you also check the salt content, the sugar content, etc. So the food guide is really a really great guide to tell us how our foods should be distributed on the plate, and the types of foods that we should be choosing most of the time. Agora, em português, vamos falar sobre o que as pessoas podem fazer para ou manejar o diabetes ou reduzir o seu risco de ter diabetes ou comer saudável. Então, essas orientações, elas servem para todas as pessoas. E o Canadá, ele tem um guia alimentar que é muito interessante, que já está traduzido tanto para o português como para outras 16 línguas. E esse guia, ele é um guia visual, ele serve como um exemplo de como montar uma alimentação saudável na maioria das refeições, utilizando os alimentos dos 3 grupos, como as frutas, os vegetais, os cereais e os grãos, e também as proteínas, incluindo uma combinação de proteínas de origem vegetal e origem animal, como, por exemplo, o feijão e o grão de bico, que são muito utilizados na cozinha portuguesa e brasileira. O guia também nos orienta a reduzir a quantidade de gordura que a gente vai utilizar, em especial a gordura que aumenta o risco de doença cardíaca, como é o caso da gordura saturada que a gente encontra na salsicha, em carnes processadas ou em carnes que têm muita gordura aparente. O guia também nos orienta a escolher os alimentos e prepará-los em casa, porque dessa forma a gente consegue limitar o açúcar, o sal e a gordura que é adicionada, porque quando esses componentes são adicionados em escala industrial, a gente tem muito menos controle de quanto esses alimentos podem contribuir para um desequilíbrio na nossa alimentação. Se você for comer essas comidas, que você as coma em frequência menor e também em quantidades menores, certo? E por último, faça da água a sua bebida de preferência, porque as calorias líquidas que a gente ingere na forma de suco, tanto o suco natural como as bebidas do tipo refrigerante e refresco, esse açúcar, ele não é tão bem registrado pelo nosso corpo. Então, a gente não sente que está mais alimentado porque tomou, por exemplo, 2 copos de Coca-Cola junto com a refeição. Então, escolha sempre a água para que você possa moderar o seu consumo de açúcar e quando você for fazer as escolhas alimentares, saiba que o marketing de alimentos ele pode influenciar suas escolhas de maneira negativa, como qualquer outra forma de marketing. Então, é importante olhar para os rótulos dos alimentos e comparar os diferentes níveis de açúcar, de sal e de gordura para que você possa fazer uma escolha mais saudável. Back to you, Kim.
Excellent. Thanks, Myra. Now, before I ask my next question, I want to get you to answer a question from our viewer, Ola, who's wondering whether the symptoms of diabetes are the same for adults and children, say children who are between about 10 and 13 years old. Is there any difference there?
So if it's a child between 10 and 13, that child will most likely have type 1 diabetes. So that's when the symptoms are the same, whether you're an adult or a younger person. However, because a 10 to 13-year-old is more likely to be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, the symptoms will develop more quickly and they can be more dramatic. So it's very important if you notice any changes in weight, in energy levels, and in your thirst and your urination, to be aware that these may be symptoms indicative of diabetes. And because type 1 diabetes, like I said, the symptoms they develop more quickly and they can be more severe. So there's a higher risk of developing dangerously high blood sugar levels in the case of type 1. So again, the importance of getting tested and contacting your healthcare professional if you do notice these symptoms, so that a diagnosis can be made very quickly. And then if the symptoms are severe enough that we know that there's thirst, there's weight loss, there's increased urination, there's loss of energy, a second test is not even required when we have clear symptoms of very high blood sugar levels in the case of type 1. And then treatment can begin if that's the case.
In português?
Agora, em português, a pergunta foi se as pessoas mais jovens e com mais idade, elas desenvolvem os mesmos tipos de sintomas quando elas podem estar com diabetes. E a resposta é sim. Agora, lembrando que se for uma pessoa de 10 a 13 anos, é mais provável que essa pessoa, apresentando esses sintomas, que ela tenha o diabetes do tipo 1. E nesse caso, os sintomas eles vão aparecer de maneira mais rápida e são sintomas que são mais severos. Então, é muito rápida a perda de peso, o nível de açúcar no sangue está extremamente elevado porque a insulina praticamente esgotou. Então, é importante, se os pais, né, ou a criança notar perda de peso, muita sede, muita urina e muito cansaço, então que esses podem ser sinais de diabetes, que a pessoa procure o seu profissional de saúde para fazer o teste. E se o teste de açúcar no sangue ele realmente vier elevado e tiver na presença de todos esses sintomas, nem precisa fazer o exame confirmatório, porque os sinais são tão clássicos que a gente já pode determinar que a pessoa tem diabetes e pode iniciar o tratamento. Back to you, Kim.
Excellent. Thanks, Myra. Now it's time to put our viewers on the hot seat and test their knowledge. So let's go to the next slide, and we're going to give you a series of true or false questions again. So true or false, eating healthily means that you can't eat chocolate. Healthy food choices mean eating healthily means eating food with no flavor. Unsweetened juice has sugar. And healthy eating means eating only fresh fruits and vegetables. And I think the emphasis there might be on the word fresh. So again, we can have more than one question here to which the answer is true. Let's see what our viewers think about which of these statements are true versus false, and then we'll take them up. Okay, we'll just give another 2 or 3 seconds. So, what do our viewers say? Eating healthily means you can't eat chocolate. So everybody knows that that is not true. Certainly you can eat really any foods in moderation. And when you're living a healthy, balanced lifestyle, fitting in exercise, hydration, sleep, stress management, it can be certainly part of a healthy diet. Also, healthy foods can be very flavorful, and some of the great examples that Myra gave us a few moments ago are some very tasty options that are also really healthy for us. Folks know that unsweetened juice does have sugar. It's a natural sugar, but it is still sugar, and it operates about the same in the bloodstream. So it's something that we have to be cognizant of and kind of watch and moderate our consumption of. All else being equal, it's preferable to have a piece of whole fruit as opposed to the juice of it. And we got sort of 50-50 answers on healthy eating means eating only fresh fruits and vegetables. Again, fresh is the operative thing there, and we know that both frozen and canned vegetables can be very, very healthy. In fact, in some cases, even more healthy because they're often processed right at the point of harvest. So they can be less expensive, and in times like we're living through right now with the COVID pandemic, they can be easy, healthy options to have on hand. So don't hold back from frozen or canned vegetables and fruits where they help make your life easier. Myra, anything you want to add to that?
Sure. So the unsweetened juice question is a question that we get a lot in practice. So it's great that we are highlighting the fact that even, and this is where food marketing can trip us up, right? So on the label, it says all natural sugar or unsweetened. So this is a perfect example where you are going to see a claim that can deceive you. But if you look at the nutrition information and it's under sugars, and the number is, you know, anywhere from 30 to up to almost 50 grams of sugar. So every 4 grams of sugar is 1 teaspoon. So a drink that in 1 cup has 30 grams of sugar, so that's between 7 and 8 teaspoons of sugar. So even though it's natural sugar, it will still raise your blood sugar levels, and it won't help you to feel satisfied. So you still need to eat something else on top of that juice. So thank you again for the opportunity to highlight this.
Great. Did you want to summarize anything of what we just said in Portuguese?
Em português. Então, as perguntas são: comer saudável significa não comer chocolate? Comer saudável significa que você só pode comer as coisas que não têm sabor? Ou o suco natural que não tem açúcar adicionado? O açúcar sem açúcar adicionado também contém açúcar? E comer saudável significa comer apenas vegetais e frutas frescos. E a resposta que está mais de acordo com o que a gente sabe é que o suco, mesmo que não tenha açúcar adicionado, ele é sim uma fonte de açúcar. No caso das outras alternativas, comer saudável pode sim ser sinônimo de comer uma alimentação extremamente saborosa, quando você sabe combinar diferentes ingredientes e diferentes temperos naturais, como as especiarias e as ervas, e também acrescentar quantidades moderadas de sal, açúcar e gordura. Você pode comer chocolate, não só o chocolate, como outras comidas podem e devem fazer parte de uma alimentação saudável, de novo, em quantidades moderadas. E os vegetais congelados, eles são tão saudáveis quanto os frescos, em particular porque eles são colhidos no pico da sua sazonalidade. Então, isso significa que eles retêm mais nutrientes até do que algum legume fresco ou fruta fresco que viajou várias horas até chegar aqui no Canadá. Então, não deixem de incluir esses vegetais congelados, em particular agora na época de pandemia, quando os alimentos podem estar mais caros ou mais difíceis da gente acessar. Back to you, Kim.
Now, I've heard that eating healthily is about more than just about what you eat, but it's about how you eat it. Is that true? And tell us more about that.
For sure. So we now know that food is more than a combination of just nutrients, right? It goes in, goes into aspects such as where we eat, when we eat, why, and how you eat. So what does this mean in terms of, actionable advice? So in terms of eating mindfully, so taking time to eat and taking time to check your hunger level. So this helps you to know how much you're eating, number one, and when you are feeling full. If you're eating on the go or you're eating while doing something else, you don't really take that time to savor the food that you're eating and to check in to see how much you've really eaten and how satisfied you feel. So mindful eating is certainly a very important element of healthy eating. Cooking more often, as I mentioned before, planning meals in advance and involving family members so that everyone knows the importance, the value, and the satisfaction of making something, that you're learning how to make, or sharing your cooking abilities from one generation to another. So for example, a grandmother teaches the mother or the father teach the kids. So it can all be fun, and the kitchen is the heart of the home. So why not have that as an opportunity to learn about and share healthy eating knowledge and healthy cooking skills. Enjoy your food, so include culture and food tradition. So no foods need to be eliminated as part of a healthy diet. And certainly there are many foods of the Portuguese and the Brazilian diets that should be part of a healthy pattern because they relate to our traditions, our identity, our festivities. And we should, yes, celebrate these foods, but we should also balance them with healthier food choices most of the time. So food is a part of our celebrations, right, in every culture. Eating meals with others. So this allows us to spend time together, to nurture our relationships, again, to slow down our eating because we are talking, because we are sharing our experiences. So it's also a component of healthy eating. Using food labels. So again, the importance of not only looking at the claims, but the actual nutrition information and the ingredient list to check to see, what are the three first items in the ingredient list, and that will tell you what's most, what's present in largest amounts in that food. And finally, make water your drink of choice so that you're not getting all those extra calories and that extra sugar from the fluids that you're drinking. Agora em português, então comer saudável não é só uma questão de comida, mas é também uma questão de como, aonde, como e por que você come. Então, compartilhar das refeições e comer consciente, tirando um tempo para as refeições, ao invés de comer enquanto está dirigindo ou enquanto está no computador ou no trabalho, permite que a gente saiba o quanto está comendo e se a gente está se sentindo mais ou menos satisfeito. Cozinhar mais frequentemente, então nos ajuda a planejar as refeições para não ter que depender de comidas prontas e comidas ultraprocessadas que são nutricionalmente menos balanceadas do que uma refeição feita em casa. Envolver outras pessoas da família. A cozinha é o coração do lar, então por que não compartilhar esses conhecimentos e essas habilidades com todo mundo, pai, mãe e crianças. Saborear a comida e celebrar as tradições e as culturas, então inclusive a cultura portuguesa e brasileira, todas as comidas podem fazer parte de um padrão alimentar saudável, desde que combinadas com alimentos, na maioria das refeições, equilibradas. Comer com os outros, então compartilhar as nossas experiências, isso nos ajuda a nutrir as relações, então, e é um componente essencial da alimentação saudável, e sempre verificar as informações nutricionais no rótulo e nas informações nutricionais e, por último, na lista de ingredientes, para que você saiba quais são os principais componentes daquele alimento. E, por último, fazer da água a sua bebida de escolha ou de preferência, porque assim você não está consumindo excesso de açúcar na forma de sucos ou na forma de outras bebidas. Back to you, Kim.
Thanks, Myra. And I just, if it's helpful, we also have a number of recipes on our website at diabetes.ca. And watch this space because we're going to be sharing meal plans for those affected by diabetes in the coming months. So stay tuned to Diabetes Canada's social media feeds and websites for information that might be helpful. So we've talked about healthy eating. Let's tackle another aspect of healthy living, which is physical activity. I know that Canada's health guidelines suggest that people should aim to be physically active for about 150 minutes a week. Could you talk about that a bit, expand on it, and give us maybe some examples as to what that could look like in practice?
Sure, Kim. What we do know is that almost everyone, irrespective of having diabetes or not having diabetes, will benefit from regular physical activity, okay? And so this involves not just, going to a gym. So we know that movement counts as long as it's planned and it's structured. So if you are just starting to be active, it's a good idea to talk to your healthcare professional about how to get started. But just as important as getting regular physical activity, we also know today that it's important to avoid sitting for long periods of time. So we know that it's recommended to try to interrupt sitting for, if you've been sitting for more than 20 to 30 minutes, try getting up briefly and moving around. So for example, at work or during your commercial break, just to get your body, your circulation activated again. And the goal in terms of physical activity is to accumulate between 150 and 300 minutes of exercise per week. And even though it sounds like a huge number, 150, 300, if we break it down into minutes per day, that's equivalent to between 20 to 30 minutes and maybe a little bit more for those who want to be more active per day. And we can even break it down more into 10-minute sessions. So if you want to do 20 minutes of walking per day and you want to do 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening, that will add up to the 150 minutes at the end of the week. And you can build on that so that you start with a goal that is manageable for you, that will increase your motivation to continue. So that's something important if you're starting out. We also recommend adding weightlifting exercises, so exercises that help to strengthen our muscles, 2 to 3 times a week. And so what that might involve is just doing a little bit of lifting, things like soup cans or a book while you watch TV, or Diabetes Canada has a resistance exercises resource that's very useful. We use it a lot in practice, and our clients do enjoy following along and watching the video of how to do these exercises properly. Just because in combination, the resistance exercise and the aerobic exercise, such as walking or biking or cycling or running or swimming or dancing, those two help to bring blood sugars down. So if you're going to start small, that's okay. And if you're going to start with walking, that's what more than 90% of people do when they are starting to be active, and walking definitely does count and does add up to the goal of 150 to 300 minutes per week. If you want to add little bits of activity throughout the day, it's always a good idea to park the car further from the store, take the stairs, walk the dog, play actively with your kids, and limit screen time, particularly with kids these days. And take 1 step, 2 steps. If a step counter or a pedometer can help you to track your steps and to try to meet your goals at the end of the day or at the end of the week, and help you to just sustain that new behavior. Agora em português, a pergunta sobre o que as pessoas podem fazer para investir na atividade física. Então, o que a gente sabe é que todas as pessoas com diabetes ou sem diabetes se beneficiariam de um nível de atividade física mais regular e e sustentável. Então, se você está apenas começando, é sempre interessante que você tenha orientação de um profissional de saúde para saber se você não tem nenhuma contraindicação antes de iniciar alguma rotina de atividade física. E tão importante quanto ter algum nível de atividade física, é importante evitar que você fique sentado por muito tempo. Então, se você está sentado por mais de 20 ou 30 minutos, é importante levantar para ativar a circulação um pouquinho. E a meta de 150 a 300 minutos por semana pode parecer muito, mas ela pode ser dividida em sessões de 10, 20 a 30 minutos. Então, isso significa, por exemplo, fazer 2 caminhadas de 10 minutos, uma vez de manhã, uma vez de tarde. No final de uma semana, você chegou nos 150 minutos e você pode ir aumentando essa atividade aos poucos. E se você quer também fazer um exercício de fortalecimento muscular, isso envolve esses exercícios de repetição, onde a gente trabalha os diferentes grupamentos musculares, porque juntos, a atividade como dançar, caminhar, andar de bicicleta, junto com os exercícios de fortalecimento muscular, eles ajudam a baixar os níveis de açúcar no sangue. Então, comece com uma meta que você acha que consegue atingir e você vai incrementando, vai aumentando essa atividade aos poucos, né? E sempre, assim, parar o carro um pouquinho mais longe da loja, usar a escada em vez do elevador, caminhar com o cachorro, brincar com as crianças e limitar o tempo que a gente passa sentado, né? E certamente a caminhada é o exercício de escolha de mais de 90% das pessoas que são fisicamente ativas e que mantêm esse hábito por longo período. Back to you, Kim.
Great. That's fantastic, Myra. Thanks. Now, just before we move on, we've got a great question from our viewer, Danielle, which is, what's the accuracy rate, or how accurate are food labels when they tell us, you know, as you said, how many grams of sugar are in a product? Can we trust that?
Very good question, Daniel. Thank you for that. So Canada has a legislation for food labeling, which means that if I'm going to put a product for sale, that product has to meet certain legislation requirements in terms of the information that's provided and in terms of how it's displayed. So what we know is that Canada has this legislation, and when you look at the food labels and you look at the label and for the information that is presented on the label is your most reliable information. It could be that there are differences in the nutrition composition of foods coming, let's say, from different parts of the world, right? So there might be differences, for example, in the vitamin content or the iron content, etc. So it could be that they are not 100% reliable, but in general, if you're looking at the nutrition information on the label, the nutrition facts panel, that is your most reliable source. And also the ingredient list, that gives you a great guide because the ingredient list lists all the ingredients that are present in that food in descending order. So you know that if sugar or salt or saturated fat is among the first 3 ingredients, that food, that will reflect the nutrition content of that food. So the numbers that you see on that table are an indication of what the ingredients that it contains. But I agree with you, it may not be 100% reliable. However, we do have legislation to try to standardize that information as much as we can in Canada. Agora em português, a gente pode confiar nos rótulos alimentares, né? E a pergunta, e a resposta é, a gente pode, o Canadá tem uma legislação que estabelece quais as informações que tem que estar no rótulo, como que elas devem estar listadas. Agora, podem existir variações na composição nutricional de alimentos que vêm de diferentes partes do mundo, mas o melhor guia para a gente utilizar nessa informação, ou na busca dessa informação, é a tabela de informações nutricionais, que tem aqueles percentuais e as gramas de carboidrato, de gordura, etc. E a lista de ingredientes, porque os ingredientes eles estão listados em ordem descendente. Então, se os primeiros 3 ingredientes de um alimento são açúcar, sal ou gordura, ou algum outro ingrediente que a gente está buscando evitar, a gente sabe que isso vai estar refletido no rótulo alimentar. Então, utilizem as informações em combinação e evitem o máximo possível aquelas alegações nutricionais que muitas vezes são desenhadas apenas para marketing. Back to you, Kim.
Great comments. Thanks so much, Myra. Now, I'd like, if I may, to take a couple of minutes to share with our viewers some things that Diabetes Canada has that might be able to help them. So if we could look at the next slide, and just want to take a moment to thank our viewers for their great questions so far, and please keep them coming. So Diabetes Canada's focus is on helping end the effects of diabetes. And we do that by raising money to fund research into prevention, management, and a cure for diabetes. We work a lot to ensure that government makes diabetes a priority. We advocate to help improve the lives of people with diabetes by ensuring that they have access to medications, to supplies, that their human rights are respected. We actively support healthcare providers, so folks like you who take care of those of us with diabetes, by providing them with the latest education, the clinical practice guidelines that we develop, by ensuring that you guys stay up to date on the emerging research and the best ways we know to care for people with diabetes and to prevent those from developing it where we can. We have a website that provides lots of information and patient resources, so that's always available for everybody. And we have a 1-800 Banting line, so that's for Dr. Frederick Banting, who discovered insulin nearly 100 years ago now. And so our viewers can call that line and get answers to any question really about diabetes in general, about programs available to help with the costs. And since COVID started, we've actually been able to offer a program where we can connect people through that line to certified diabetes educators like Myra, who will call you back and give you personalized advice or recommendations about diabetes. So do reach out to us if you've got any questions.
Okay. Now I'm going to repeat your comments in português. Então, em português, o que a Kema acabou de resumir sobre o que o Diabetes Canadá está fazendo para ajudar as pessoas com diabetes. Então, eles oferecem financiamento para pesquisa, para prevenir, para o manejo ou para a cura do diabetes. Eles fazem ações que influenciam as legislações elaboradas pelo governo para manter o diabetes como uma prioridade na agenda de saúde pública do Canadá. Eles também eles também fazem um trabalho de diretamente influenciar como o governo reconhece os direitos das pessoas com diabetes e como esses direitos eles estão embutidos nos diferentes programas e nas diferentes legislações das províncias. O Diabetes Canadá também apoia profissionais como eu, que trabalhamos diretamente com pessoas que têm diabetes, com o desenvolvimento das diretrizes clínicas que orientam a nossa prática e muitos webinars e muitas sessões online que nos ajudam a nos manter atualizados. Eles também mantêm um site com informações atualizadas, inclusive um site agora específico para o COVID, e nós temos um webinar em português com essas informações, e também as pessoas podem se conectar diretamente com a linha 1-800 Banting, onde vocês podem submeter perguntas que vão ser submetidas a profissionais com especialização em diabetes, como é o meu caso, e essas pessoas vão entrar em contato com você dentro de 24 a 48 horas. Então, esse é só um resumo do que o Diabetes Canadá está fazendo, e a gente encoraja vocês a entrarem no site para conhecer mais desse trabalho. Back to you, Kim.
Thank you so much, Myra. Well, I see now that we're pretty much at the end of our time together. I think you've offered our viewers so much helpful information. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise, Myra. We'll be making this video, or this webinar rather, available by video on Diabetes Canada's YouTube channel. So you can always visit there and watch it back if you wanted to revisit any of the tips. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at Diabetes Canada at any time for more questions. So thank you to all of our viewers. Obrigada, and be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.